Today on the business end, we're joined by a man who knows what it means to hold the line, not just in the scrum, but in life. BJ Botha is a Rugby World Cup winner with the Springboks, a tighthead prop who's built his career on discipline, resilience, and the dark arts of the front row. He's played across the world as a professional, earning 25 caps for South Africa, and became a cult hero in Ireland through his time with Ulster and Munster. But it's what's come after the final whistle that makes BJ's story even more compelling. He transitioned from elite rugby into coaching, fatherhood, and founding the BJ Botha Scrum Academy, a platform mentoring the next generation of front row leaders. He's a father of 6, an adopted Irishman, and someone who leads with quiet presence and a deep purpose, long after the roar of the stadium has faded. Today we dive into the mindset of a man who's played the world's best, started over more than once and continues to shape the game from the grassroots to the boardroom. BJ Botha, welcome to the business end.
Cheers, Liam. Thanks very much. Cheers, Fitzy. Appreciate it.
Welcome, BJ. Welcome. So, BJ, let's kick off. You're a Springbok. You've won a World Cup. You've scrummed against some of the best players of this generation. And now you're mentoring the next generation. But today, in 2025, as a father, a coach, a founder, what would you say was in your DNA to have achieved so much?
Yeah, I think I can take it right back to the beginning, I think it's kind of from early stages, kind of grew up in a big family, all boys. And I suppose I do recall many times my father waking me up in the early hours of the morning, watching the Springboks play New Zealand, the All Blacks, and similarly then those memories stay, still in the back of the head, and that love for rugby in South Africa, I suppose, sticks around for many years. And similarly, even just, I remember now recalling actually on the way here was, my dad still, heavily involved. I don't know if you remember the heavyweight boxing bouts. They were also early mornings back in the day, in those days. So, it was kind of instilled this within me, and I suppose, as the years went on, I felt that, there was something out there that I really wanted to achieve. And I suppose one of them was definitely, play for my country. Obviously locally in Durban, growing up was first and foremost the Sharks. But yeah, I suppose with that, drive comes all the other aspects of life. And I suppose, finding your way of moving forward 2 steps and 1 step back, is this kind of, I suppose, refined and I found a way, to kind of get to the top.
And you earned your Springboks jersey the hard way. You grew up in Durban. You grew up in a country where like rugby is a religion. What did the culture teach you about growing up in a culture? Teach you about toughness, humility, and self-belief?
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, I suppose, as we know, with the South African, schools platform, I suppose there's really is this kind of real cauldron. It's been there since the time I knew and started. And I suppose, you kind of either sink or swim, but, and I enjoyed that, I really enjoyed that part. I went to a real, rugby primary school, in the Free State, and then moved to Durban, and went to high school at a non-rugby school, and I think looking back now, this is probably the change that probably, I would say, if you want to call, there was a point in time that, set me on my way, was the fact that I probably didn't, because I went to a non-rugby playing school, I felt that I was going to find a way no matter what, I didn't have the real platform, but I tried to say, putting things together, right, okay, I'll have to make it to this trial, and I suppose I'll have to go through 2 trials to get to the first trial of actually a rugby, kind of going school trial, if you understand what I mean. So all these little developments, I suppose, set me in a way, set me on a way, it's kind of build up that resilience around things, in the sense of what I wanted to achieve. And I suppose that happened at a really young age. There was obviously a lot of setbacks, as there would be. And I think as with everything, you get your breaks. And I think the important part that I learned is when you do, you're ready. I think that's the one aspect of I suppose coming through the system as a player itself. When you do get your opportunity, you are ready. It might be kind of hammering at this wall and it's not moving. And I suppose when that opportunity comes, I find a lot that there are players, and I suppose players that are coaching now, giving that advice to just be ready, because it's definitely going to come when you least expect it.
Do you think, not going to a rugby school, do you think that gave you the drive, that sense of like you had to overcome more obstacles, or you felt you had more to prove? Do you think that made you more motivated, determined to overcome that?
Oh, there's no doubt about that. I suppose my motivation was, proving the system wrong. And I think there's
Yeah.
no real bigger motivator, I suppose, if you're up for it. And, the system is the system, really, and I think that's been kind of this general, I suppose throughout the world of rugby, there's a system, and I think as is with my, current position now in my business that we'll speak about later, I feel, and sometimes you look at, and I've read kind of Malcolm Gladwell's book about the outliers and these guys that come through the system, and then the guys that come through another way, the guys that, and not to say that I was part of that, but I definitely was, that refinement was a lot harder. And I suppose that's what I think gave me that, kind of harder edge around just keep on, kind of hammering at it. Of course, I had a big support system around me. As I said, you definitely need, things to go your way. I was lucky enough to kind of have a great coach in my early club years that backed me, gave me opportunity, and I think that's a huge part of it. But in the sense, I also had the backing of my family. Early on, I had obviously my parents, my brothers, and then I met my wife very early on, in my school years. So we were great friends early on, and she walked that road right from the beginning with me. So I think those are all aspects that again allow you to keep on believing, because it's a real tricky place to be, when you're waiting for that opening to happen.
Yeah.
It's interesting listening to you there, BJ, and having, going from a rugby playing primary school into a non-rugby playing high school, as to whether or not that, obviously you've got to battle and fight through, but also you've got to make that decision, presuming 12, 13, that you really do want to be involved in rugby, or conversely, had it been that you'd been in a high school that played rugby, it wouldn't have been a choice. You'd have been training and playing. So you had to make that decision mentally that this is something I want to do, and I'm going to overcome the obstacles to do it. Is that correct? Yeah,
definitely. You'll find a way, because I think if you take it back and you kind of turn it upside down, if you are in a rugby school, I think it virtually happens naturally. You kind of with better players anyway. They're driving you. You're in the system at all. So basically, you already have it on the plate. You have already served too. And I suppose when I was in non-rugby playing school, if you want to call it that, I was looking for that. I was looking for that edge. I was trying to find the time. Where am I going to gym? Where am I going to find extra rugby time? Because again, we had rugby, but we stopped, say, 6 weeks. I would say 4-5 weeks before the big school season ended. Mm-hmm. So where was I filling up those extra 6 weeks? And I was filling it up at club rugby. I was lucky enough that my club in Durban, Collegians, was actually allowing me to play under 21 rugby at 17, 18,
mm-hmm.
because I was playing for the C team, but I suppose I was playing rugby. And,
mm-hmm.
and I suppose, again, that opportunity to play club was something that also fell in my way. Again, if I didn't have that, who knows, I suppose. But again, that club subsequently I continued with. The opportunities that came from that were massive. So yeah, I would say all those things had knock-on effects, and I suppose getting over those obstacles again was the key for me to find to find a way around it. I kind of told my dad I'll never forget it, even though I suppose look back now and you said, where did you get that from? It was just before I think 94, was around 94. 93, 94, and I said, listen, I said to him, listen, I want to become a rugby player. I was like, he says, yeah, that's great, all the rest of it. And obviously, 95 took place, and then things suddenly evolved. And then 97, I said, well, it looks like it's professional now, you know. And I remember my dad looking at me, he was like, yeah, exactly. He was like, so I also had that real, I don't know what it was. I don't know how and how that came about, but I suppose I had a real kind of focus on what I wanted early on, you know. And I suppose, you know, it was never, of course, never a surety, but I found in my way of trying to sort through everything and make it my number one goal, really, in one sense, and really sacrifice a lot of things on the way for that.
Very much.
Just quickly on that as well. Growing up in South Africa, what did as a kid, what did rugby, growing up with the culture of South African rugby, what did it teach you as a child? Because me and Fitzy speak about this as well. We say that, you know, rugby doesn't teach you just how to play rugby. It teaches you values as an adult. What did it teach you as a kid?
Yeah, it taught me, you know, the baseline of everything from discipline to kind of confidence to kind of belief, you know, kind of, as I said, it taught me how can I get rid of the classroom, you know, or forget about life, really, in one sense, you know, and just release it on the rugby field. And I suppose one sense, when you're young enough, you're carefree, and, you know, it was the enjoyment and the fun side of playing rugby. Really, it was just part of that whole, you know, ethos of playing rugby. You had the discipline, you had the respect of the other players, because were taught that, you know, kind of, and I suppose that just continued through that. And I suppose as you went higher in the ranks, what was great for me is you released that kind of tension and aggression on the field, you know, like that was great part of, you know, playing rugby, and that's where you released it, you know. And I suppose you looked forward to that, and contact, everything, you know, everything was about contact. So I found that again, and, you know, the big thing for me is I still lifelong friends early on in rugby, and I suppose those players around me was part of my team, you know. And I suppose that it also taught you from a young age how to work as a team, and how to kind of, yeah, I suppose, come over another team and get a result, or how to deal with a loss. You know, I think it's just so many learnings in rugby, or make it such a special game. And I suppose early on, in fortunate to play it early on, you know. And I think when you start the game early on, I think it kind of gets rid a lot of what I found now most recently. It gets rid of a lot of the kind of side issues around thinking about too much of the game. You know, you're kind of young enough just to enjoy it, and just to play carefree, and actually you're not even worried or concerned about safety, and, you know, scared. You're too young for that almost, you know. So I think that inevitably runs into your teens, and then runs into your high school years. And the game is just really, as you say, I think there's numerous pictures of babies being born with a leather Springbok rugby ball next to them, you know, as they've been born. And in South Africa, it's just that sport that you kind of naturally go into. And if you don't, you know, it's fine. But I suppose they are a little bit guarded, you know, pushed into that into that role early on.
Yeah.
And I would say as well, what's coming through in spades is that about adaptability. You know, that you didn't have a smooth path through to get into the Natal representative side. So you were adaptable. You solved problems, which is, you know, is part of being successful in life and part of building businesses. And the other thing that seems to be coming through, which I've witnessed myself as a teammate of yours at Ulster, is that work ethic. You know, if you want to be successful, you've got to grind, right? And, you know, and that always struck me, you know, playing alongside you and training alongside you, your desire and your work ethic.
No, there's no doubt. I mean, adaptation is a tough one, you know. And as they say, you know, you need to adapt or die. And I suppose that's the big key around making any progress, you know, and find another way around it. I remember, you know, being devastated leaving, you know, my primary school, in the Free State, and kind of moving to Natal. But, you know, I wouldn't change it for the world. But again, the adaptation that took place there, I was allowed to adapt as well, as I said, for all the support staff that was around me, my family, my obviously coaches that I had along the way. And I suppose leading on to that was, again, learning from rugby that nothing really just comes easy as well. And that then poured into the work ethic side of things. So obviously all those are learned behaviors, especially the work ethic side of things. It was a learned behavior. I did learn it again from my father very early on. My father was an ultra marathon runner. So, I'll never forget it. He told me, listen, that's fine. You're about 11 years old now. I think I was about 11. And he was obviously training. He was running plus minus 100 milers all the time. And he's like, listen, do you want to start running with me in the morning? And I was like, yeah, definitely. I'm into that, whatever, 100%. Or he said, right, I'll wake up tomorrow morning. And so he woke me up 5 o'clock, whatever it was, 5:30. And I was like, no, Dad, I'm still sleeping. And so he left me. Anyway, so he came back from his run. I was like, oh, why don't you wake me up? He says, no, I did wake you up. You didn't come with. He says, okay, tomorrow morning, definitely. Anyway, next morning, wake me up, too nice in the bed, left me out to go. And then the third time he came to me, he was just obviously that second time, came back from run. He says, listen, I'm going to wake you up one more time, and then it's up to you. And I suppose it's a lesson in saying, listen, well, the drive and that has to come from inside, it has to mean enough. Okay. It has to mean enough from, you can pull the line so much. And I know it was my father, but I suppose leading into coaching and even from, I suppose, players that want to make it into professional era, like that really deep desire can only live with you, it only comes from inside, and no one else understands that fire and that maintaining that fire through building that. And I suppose, obviously, I woke up the next morning and, that's the end of that. And, I think it was a big learning curve. That sits in the back of my mind, quite vividly.
And building on your adaptability, you've played in some distinct rugby cultures. Obviously, you left South Africa, you came to Ireland, you played with Ulster, you played with Munster, you played in France with Lyon. Which one of those stretched you most as a person?
I think leading into all those stadiums, I mean, it's just been, for me, at those stages, specifically, I suppose, when I came abroad, I was really, a little bit older, into my late 20s. And I suppose I had a job to do. I was brought over to do a job, and I suppose I looked at it like that. And, I kind of found my way around, like, how do I work and control what I can control, without having this noise and emotion really affect me, because you can get caught up in that. I think I had the ability, I suppose, with the players around me to kind of block that out, and I suppose enjoy the occasion, but then also come and kind of focus really in on the job and what we need to control and do at that point. And I suppose as players that I played with, coaches that coached me, but I suppose specifically players that I played with, as I said, learned massive amounts from them of how they deal with pressure situations in that environment, in the different stadiums, whether it be one of the biggest stadiums, wasn't actually one of those stadiums, one of the biggest games ever, and the ones that probably tested me the most was actually a semi-final against Clermont in Marseille, Velodrome, which was basically so loud you couldn't actually hear anyone at all, even next to you. And it was that game where, I don't know if you remember, Paul O'Connell got something happened that he should have got a sanction. They said he should have got a sanction, but he didn't. And basically they were booing him onto the field, running onto the field. And, we knew we were up against the wall. I mean, that Clermont army, runs in France. And it was an environment that we had to adapt. And I suppose one part of me was saying, listen, looking at my teammates, looking at them, it was that kind of calmness, just really kind of feeling, listen, we kind of in control here. We know what we have to do. We've done our preparation. And I suppose, it's just looking back at those stadiums that I played against. You mentioned as well, Fitzy, and, taking the time to take it in, I suppose, one part, and then looking inwards and say, listen, we've got a job to do here. Don't get too emotional. Because I think with the emotion comes, obviously, we get the nerves going again and everything else that comes with it. So I think it's part and parcel of the experience you gain as a professional player. And I suppose specifically in those stadiums, when I came abroad, I had that base already, and I'm not to say that I didn't have that stress and nerves and pressure, but I suppose in some way I knew how to overcome it.
And obviously we're talking about pressure here, and let's look at the 2007 World Cup squad when you were picked, and Joe Public's looking there and going like, how on earth can you cope with the pressure of putting on that jersey with the weight of the nation behind you? But what stands out the most for you during that time in 2007? Was it the pressure, the culture, or the brotherhood?
Well, if I can say all of the above. Well, first and foremost, it was the pressure. I want to say the pressure almost got to me. I think the fact is that you have an opportunity to be part of something special. We already in that 2007 group. Obviously, I was with them the year before, and just a little bit the year before in 2005. It was a real. You felt it was a real special group, and not only because of South Africa. Most of that, I don't know if you look back at now, that Super Rugby final that we played with the Bulls. That the Bulls unfortunately beat us in the last minute by Brian Abana's try, which still sits in the back of my mind, that we don't talk about. Both those teams was really the core of that group, and I mean, we were facing each other, and, so I suppose looking back now, you kind of look back at the pressure that you put yourself an individual, but also us as a group. We didn't have great results in that 2006 campaign at all in the Tri-Nations. We were coming through that, and so we're thinking about where we were at. But I suppose the one thing Jake always did very well, Jake White did very well, he always brought us back to the kind of the big kind of picture in the middle. Where are we going to be in 2007 October? Where are we going to be? Looking at the change room. What is going to be in this middle of the change room? What is the mental aspect? What are we looking at mentally? Every time we lost, I think Australia, lost to New Zealand, we brought it in again. And even though we were disappointed, we had to fix everything that happened. We still brought it into, right, guys, the long game. Yeah. Okay. So pressure-wise, you wanted to be part of that group. So I was putting myself under pressure, playing for the Sharks, whatever. I had a big neck injury in 2006 as well. Had to go for surgery. So all these things come back over, and you're asking questions of yourself. Are you going to make it back into the squad? What's going to happen? All this sort of stuff that, as you know, as a professional player, you deal with. So a lot of pressure there. And I suppose once you were in the World Cup, now it's about staying there, playing in the games, being the number one, staying in the World Cup, and then being there hopefully at the end that we believed. We really did believe as a bringing through the culture now. We really believed, Liam and Fitzy, we believed that we could go all the way. And I suppose that's kind of, you can say that now, it's easy in hindsight, but we really did as a group. There was nothing really, that everything wasn't all in our control, but I suppose we felt that if we played like we could get to the end and give ourselves a good chance to be in the final. And that's all we needed to do, And I suppose bringing back that brotherhood, it's a special group of players. We still in touch now on a group. We kind of wish each other well with everything from having children to being fathers to having successful businesses and supporting guys that need support, and a real special group as we are, because we've experienced something. I think we only realize now down the road how special that is. You kind of also find yourself very lucky to be at that place, really performing, and also being at a level that you be selected. Your form might be down, and I suppose all these things that can count against you, and then still win it at the end. So you're very fortunate. I find myself very fortunate, privileged, to be part of that group, that it's given me multiple opportunities in my rugby, but also in life. And I suppose it's not coming back to the end when the final whistle did blow. I told people there was really a sense of relief, like it almost lifted that kind of, how can I say, as a pot, that's just kind of, or just taking that precious steam off and just saying it's done now. And it was like, it's relief that all the building up over the years is done now. It's like, we'll celebrate later, but we just want to take a minute to just release what we've been holding in all this time, So yeah, as I said, it crosses all those parts.
It's interesting listening to you there, and again, for our listeners, very few people get to win a World Cup, get to the top of the mountain, so to speak. But there's some very interesting points that you raised there. You spoke about Jake White, the plan, the collective buy-in by the players, that visualization of that plan daily, and the work to go through that plan and build on on it, layer upon layer upon a layer, and get to that end point where you can, take a deep breath, let the pressure off, and enjoy in that moment what you've achieved. And hell of an achievement.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, that visualization was massive. You kind of felt that it's not only the players as well. So it was the support staff, the physio, the doctor, the assistant coaches, everyone. And even to say that we even went even further. So we had a basically a band, a wristband. I've said this before in a podcast thing before. We had a wristband made, and I think it said something like "Believe 48" or "Believe 53." So that was the number of our squad, okay? The numbers of our squad, okay? And we had it on our, obviously, like those Lance Armstrong wristbands, basically. And we had that before and during the campaign, and the families and wives and friends, whatever, had that as well. And that whole visualization that, we just keep our eyes, we kind of keep, we can see what we're looking at long term. Yeah, we keep our eyes, but we keep ourselves present. Yeah. So we understand where we're going, but we keep ourselves present here, and it's going to take a squad. It's going to take a team. And I suppose that's in essence what I think is so special about a campaign like that, but especially a World Cup, because it takes the team. You might have a guy playing 10 minutes, but he gives that player 10 minutes that went off time to maybe prepare for the next game, or I don't know, that whole squad system around the bench and how they continue with the momentum. There's no questions around the individual, effort. They continue and take the torch up further, and let's move forward. We're moving forward and progressing. So I couldn't agree with you more, Fitzy. It's that whole visualization which was again brought in, by the coaches and the players bought into it.
Yeah, I mean, that's an important point, BJ, as well. Fitzy always says you start with the end and then work your way backwards. Big saying of Fitzy, and that's what happened there.
Yeah, I know.
The other point I was going to say, I mean, you talk about it, and like obviously it's inscribed in gold that you won the World Cup at that time. But like, we've spoken to players in the past, and it's all about memories, and they say it's the memories that they can remember rather than the actual results. Would that be true for you as well?
Yeah, definitely. I would say the memories. There's no doubt. It's no doubt the memories of, you're with each other for a long time. And I mean, you kind of have a group of men there that have got a lot of things on the periphery. You're away from home. Some of them at that stage, I didn't have a family, but I could imagine now. You kind of 6 weeks, 7 weeks on the road, away from your family. You have some guys that maybe business interests, other things that were going on in their lives, stresses, whatever. But I suppose that was always their safe place. There was a safe place, it kind of almost created of trust between, this team and this family. That was always the essence. And I suppose you see it, don't want to say it, but I think that's quite similar to what the guys find now in the Springbok setup, that obviously Rusty's created and stuff. But I suppose looking back at what we had, that's what you found, that they were looking after the family side of things as well, which is so powerful. I always found that coaches that I've been coached with that started off first as showing their vulnerability as a family man, or kind of showing what they stand for outside of their coaching position, or showing the players more than what they see in the media. For me, as a player, straight away I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go deeper for this coach now. I'm going to go to a place for him now that we need to, because he's bought fully in here, and I suppose that's what happened there, players and coaches.
Well, that's an interesting segue there, talking about coaches and building that extended family and making sure that your family and you are taken care of as you've moved around, and you've moved to Ireland, a couple into Munster and Ulster and into France. How did you find off of the pitch those environments? What were the challenges? How did you and your family settle in, and what was the good and the bad and the indifferent of those transitions?
Yeah, I would say initially, as you are, we actually came over very, just before, a month before our firstborn in Ulster. So if you remember that, so that was its own stresses, and on our own, first baby coming, and you don't kind of think you actually want to be around your extended family at that stage. You know, you kind of, what's going on here, and like kind of don't know where you are. But we dealt with that, and I suppose the rest is history. And you know, I suppose we have then overcome, you know, obviously that with kind of enjoying that moment alone and kind of building that our family abroad. And I suppose that's externally to the rugby side of things. But we've been very welcomed, and again felt that welcoming around all the teams I've played for, you know, lucky enough to feel that really in some way or the other. And I suppose that's obviously made it a lot easier. I suppose as my career has kind of progressed, I also felt that, you know, I suppose the mental side around my, how can I say, my playing, you know, becoming a father, these things have changed things as they've gone along, you know. You kind of find yourself, well, you know, you change as a person. You kind of, I don't know to put your finger on it, but you do change, you know, and you find yourself with other kind of, I suppose, stresses around the environment, you know, where we're going next. I suppose as a family, you find yourself abroad. Are we going back to South Africa? You know, what's the next contract, et cetera, et cetera. So look, those are also ones you deal with, you know. And I suppose in a nutshell, you know, we've been lucky. We've been really looked after well. Challenges around being away from home has probably been the biggest, you know, because you kind of find your own little community is your rugby side of things, of course. But then, you know, it is your little community of family that you've created. And I think we found a way to really, you know, become stronger as a family and, you know, enjoy the time we've had, which is awesome to kind of play rugby in another country, in another team. It's been great for us.
Fantastic.
And in terms of playing, was there ever a moment where you felt your confidence cracked, and how did you how would you bounce back from that?
I think there were definitely moments where you kind of overthinking or kind of second guess certain things. I think you find yourself, you know, prepping unbelievably well for a game, and you get caught, you know, as they say, with your pants down. You know, you might have worked out, you know, in a scrum, and you find yourself, you know, where to next after the last scrum. And I think as a front rower, there's nothing worse, you know. I kind of call it in my coaching now, survival mode. And what it really is really you start overthinking certain aspects of the scrum, which you shouldn't. You should be going back to what you've kind of prepped and practiced. And what you start thinking is very individual. You start thinking, well, I just want to get the scrum over with just so we can get the ball out. But what inevitably you do is, you, as a tighthead, you separate yourself from your hooker. You kind of start going too far in, if you in at all, and the loose head gets a go on you, and you kind of then your tickets anywhere. And I suppose that's probably the one area that I've always kind of tried to make, try to be consistent at throughout my whole career, because I felt that if that's consistent, you know, enough, it's tough to analyze a scrum that's kind of you can't go at, you know. And half the battle really is that, because if you show any cracks or any grey area there, they're going to come at you no matter what. So even though they might not be as strong as you, they're just going to keep on coming at you. And that's probably the battle in itself, you know, that you find yourself that they're coming at you anyway. And you're fatigued, or you're coming off a maul or 10 tackles, and you find yourself. So I think to answer your question from a general rugby perspective, early on in my career, I found myself probably, especially with playing against Australia, you know, Super Rugby was fast. It was a fast game. You know, you kind of had to make a lot of tackles and make up a lot of space. And, you know, as you find yourself as a front row, you know, you cover a lot of areas. So you don't question, I think, confidence. I think it's just those kind of areas that you find you were maybe exposed and you could find a way to fix it. But later down in my career, scrum-wise, I really, you know, as I did right from the beginning, but even later on, especially when I came to abroad, as I mentioned earlier, there was a job I needed to do, you know, and I took that obviously very seriously. And I suppose I put all my kind of eggs in one basket to make sure that if they needed a scrum at this place, that it was done, whether I had to tell the hooker to do this or the back row or the second row, made sure all those components were in place before the first scrum. And if it didn't happen, you know, during that game, I'd try and fix it, you know. So I wouldn't say it as much of a confidence thing, that it took a shock. It was definitely second guessing and then finding a way around it, you know. But I suppose in the early days, scrumming has changed, you know. Back in the day, I remember playing in Argentina, Mar del Plata and Rosario. I was playing for my club side, and these man mountains were coming at you, and you just didn't have a choice. You kind of engage. I hope I land somewhere. I might come out the other side. Who knows where the ball is? But I'm alive and I'm running off the scrum. Let's just go. And it was one of those areas where you kind of find, you kind of the fear. You almost, I wouldn't say fear driven, but you kind of find a way through that. And I suppose that in a way was part of the growth phase as well.
For all the viewers don't understand, so Fitzy's a loose head prop and BJ's a tight head prop. So basically it means a tight head prop is a very defensive position. I'm speaking to the Springbok World Cup winner here, so he's probably thinking, what are you talking about? But you're always under attack. It's a very defensive position. But let me just ask you, have you ever been lifted up in the air by a loose head? And how did you deal with that, if it ever happened? Apart from around the ear, if you did it.
Thankfully, I haven't. And I think lifting sometimes is a kind of, people look at the lifting side of things and actually being the full-on action from the loose head. Now, what invariably happens with lifting, really, a lot of the times, if you look what happens at the back of the back of the tight head, he has massive pressure from his second row, actually, pushing him up. So his shape is actually letting him down. Generally, what we want from a tight head is, if anything, go down. That's your safety. If anything, go down. So if you want, go underground, because again, a loose head doesn't want that. He wants to lift you. So no, there's definitely times. I remember playing against England. I didn't go up, but I was locked in. So I was playing against England. I can't remember the loose head. He wasn't really played many tests for them. But 2006, I remember in the scrum I was in, and Fitzy will understand this. I was caught between the hooker. So the hooker basically had his shoulder above my neck, and the loose head was nicely underneath. So I was sandwiched beautifully there by them, and I couldn't. There was no safety, and the safety generally, if you have some momentum in those days off the engage, was to come in a little bit, but I couldn't, because the hooker was so solid there. And I literally tried to go, and the pressure came from behind, and actually my neck took it, and I actually popped a few facet joints, which sounds it sounds a lot worse than it really is. It's just the facet joints that pop. But what it does really, it locks your neck up. So I was at half time, I just couldn't move anything. It was just a safety thing. So I went off, but that's probably one of the areas where you felt yourself, okay, now there's nowhere for me to go here. I wasn't lifted, but I was definitely compressed, if you want to call it that.
It's not for the faint-hearted.
No.
For sure. So, you had a fabulous career and a long one. You played in a lot of different places, played a lot of games. But as we all know, at some point that career comes to an end, and it's time to transition. How did you find that transition? And what was it like for you? What was your thought process around that time?
Yeah, Fitzy, I reckon, like everyone and every professional sportsman or rugby player, I think it was definitely very, very difficult. I think in part you kind of leave this environment, especially I was fortunate enough to have 18 years at the top. And I suppose looking at that time, you never can prepare fully, because you kind of go from the top and then fall down the bottom. You fall arse out the bottom. So you're like, well, what's catching you? And I suppose that's where you look at it, and what is catching you is your environment at home, and your family and your people and your friends closest to you, because they're the people that have been there all along, and the ups and the downs, and they know what sacrifices and the stresses it's had on the family or the friends and all the rest of it. And so you don't really can prepare for it, can you? And I suppose, you kind of finding yourself in normality, because it is a different world, finding yourself in a world that you don't get everything on your plate, and you're not walking into a kind of a top salary or top high performance environment, everything done for you with physios and everything is really done for you, and you kind of find yourself very quickly, trying to reinvent yourself. So I definitely took some time. What I found was I did a couple of ultra kind of experiences. I did a couple of the mini kind of 70.3 Ironman, but as I said, walking across the line with my brother, and I did a couple of mountain biking challenges in South Africa, the Cape Epic, and it was just kind of me, I suppose, finding a way to keep on training for something that I can kind of look forward to and prepare myself for. I look back now, and that's what is trying to almost not replace it, but looking for that kind of, I suppose, routine, in one sense, that you were so used to. So it definitely took some time, Fitzy. I mean, I suppose I started what is now BJ Botha, Academy. I started Tight Five Consultants back in 2018, 19 when I retired, and I suppose not knowing really what you wanted to create with that. I suppose you knew the broader picture, but how to implement was really completely different. I suppose within that was all these other testing things, of obviously finding yourself of what you really want to do after rugby, Nevertheless, come out the other side, and as we know, as rugby players, you kind of deal with a lot of stress anyway in real time, in milliseconds on the field. So having the support staff around you and people that are around you, you find a way. And I suppose I've been fortunate that I have in some way, found a direction that I'm very passionate about and really enjoy.
If you ever, sorry, Fitz.
No, go ahead, Moon.
Yeah, was there ever a moment where you felt like completely lost? I've just completely lost my way. I don't know what I'm doing, and if so, how did you rebuild? Or if not, great.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I would say sometimes, I don't know why I say this, but I suppose I think if you I don't know why, I just feel it's like it's probably driven in my way. I'm a family man, come from a big family, and I think my family took over there in the sense of my children, and I suppose your mind is taken away from really thinking deeply about that emotional side and your attachment to the team. And I suppose that's really kind of replaced by that, and it kind of, it's very much quickly turned to, right, listen, get on the horse and let's get on with it. It's like, you don't sit in that moment too long, you can't afford to.
Actually, BJ, I'll just say, sorry to interrupt, but I mean, like, being the father, I'm the father of one child, you're the father of six. You didn't have time to
Well, now I'm a father of six, but back then I was father of, I can't even remember now, I was father of four, probably, 4 or 5. But the thing is, you can't sit in that, but it's not about, I suppose it's not about the obvious, about mouths to feed and all that stuff. It's not about that. It's not about that at all. It's about, I suppose, the purpose, and I suppose the factors that I love first and foremost, being, kind of husband and father. I mean, that's what I love most. And I suppose that's for me, number one. And I suppose when you look at that, what's really important to you, it takes away a lot of those other stresses initially. I mean, it never takes them completely away until later on. I sometimes speak to some players that I've spoken to. I think it's some players have told me it takes a 3-4 year cycle, sometimes a 5-year cycle. And I think I've found that now probably to be a 4-year cycle, 5-year cycle maybe, that you start coming out the other side. And, I suppose when you look back now, and I get asked this question a lot, what do I miss? I said, well, I don't miss, I suppose, much other than, I suppose, playing together as a team and training as a team. I don't miss the travel. I suppose early on you love that as a player. I don't miss the travel at all. I was at Montauban, and BZ is now recently, and sitting in one of their meetings, looking at the game plan and stuff, and sitting there as a front row forward. You don't miss that at all. You just want to play the game. But I think things have changed now, and I suppose when I look at rugby now, I'm now instilled in what I want to change in my own way of coaching and my academy. That's where I want to bring all my energy and all my passion through, and being grateful for the time that was invested in me through the coaches and players that are with me, to carry that over now to the new generation, of seeing the obstacles they face from a mentorship and a guidance perspective and a coaching perspective and all those other things. I find all my energy is driven there now. So it's quite a easy transition, that, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah.
And would you have any advice? I mean, it sounds like you've had a smoother transition, but it's still a difficult one, going from one world to another. Would you have any advice for players that are going through that transition or coming up to that transition point to make it smoother?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, I was thinking as well about, is this something that's actually really happening? Am I thinking about, missing rugby or missing that environment, to actually say, listen, this is something, So it is actually something. It's not just people talk about it, because until you hit that point, you're like thinking, well, actually, is this just kind of kind of something I'm feeling from something else, or is this actually because I've left the game now? Because it is that isolation straight away. It's like the whole thing about being injured. You're outside the squad and you're completely isolated, and then suddenly you're in the squad again. It's a completely dimension. And obviously, as we know, different people come from different backgrounds. They've got different support systems. There's no doubt to identify that is the case, and reach out. I would say reach out to your fellow teammates. There are a lot better systems and I suppose platforms out there now today that in one sense we had, and I suppose I had, and I think there's a lot more support around this, and they will guide you and I suppose put things in place to make that transition a little bit smoother. And I think the things are definitely getting a lot better now. There's no doubt about that transition is getting, we know and we can see with anything from, I remember back in the day, Yanni Duplessis, a former teammate of mine, he was doing medicine, playing with us. I mean, amazing. And, at sometimes the coach had to say, listen, well, do your session, and then head off and then make sure you're back for this. And, kind of trying to make a plan for him, but also, listen, you're also a professional rugby player. So I think what happened was now I find down the end part now where we are now, I think organizations understand the long game as well for the player, individual, personally. They understand his long-term, kind of academic side or studies or, trying to put things in place that they can find that balance, and I think that makes it a lot easier. I don't say easier, but it makes it smoother for the players on the other side. But then a lot of them don't have that either, and I suppose specifically in our know friends and, fellow players in South Africa that have retired early on from an injury or retired from a no contract. And those are tough times, I think you find yourself in a really precarious position where you've completely lost, and obviously players go into depression. And I suppose, again, you don't really know exactly, let's box depression, you can't. There's many parts to it, and I suppose we need to identify those things, I think, in players. And I suppose the biggest thing we can as rugby players is kind of make sure, for me, I see it quite often, is maybe look to reach out. It's easier said than done, but they have that platform in place, and I suppose we're aware of it as past players. So as I said, if you're part of a group, past player group, I think there's a lot in that, but a lot of players don't have that, but I've been obviously fortunate enough to have that.
I think on that point, it's about strong leadership as well. So if you're a young player, the last thing you want to do is do a course or something, and you just want to train, and if you're not training, you want to rest. And I think that's where strong leadership comes in at rugby clubs, where they're telling the players they must go and do courses and prepare for life after rugby.
Look, it's very difficult. It's very difficult. If someone had to tell me while I was playing, to kind of go and do a course now, thinking about now, I find, I would think with this head this brain that I've got today. But back then, I'm like, all I'm thinking about, exactly what you're saying, Liam, is rest, recovery, and get myself ready for combat and ready for the game. I mean, that's what I'm preparing for, because, I mean, looking at the game itself back when we were playing, and I suppose, it's a 7-day, as we know, it's a 7-day sacrifice. If you're not, if you're playing on a Saturday, you're licking your wounds on a Sunday, you're recovering, you kind of have this kind of hangover from the game, whether you won or lost. You're coming into Monday, you kind of bridging that whole week. Where do you find the time, especially if you've got a family or other stuff? It's that identifying from a club perspective. Listen, guys, within the club environment, we're going to instill this. And I think clubs that have done it really successfully well is a club like Saracens. I suppose they are a club that are really leading the way with that. I don't know what they've done, but they have some really smart people at the top. Not only have they put people in positions of to kind of, if they want to get their kind of studies done, but they've actually brought through people and put them into businesses while they're playing, give them that experience, put them into positions where they can really grasp what a corporate environment's like. And I think that's great.
No, they've I think Saracens have set up they've got a business club within their network, but I really think it's down to the leadership right at the top of clubs to make sure that the players are prepared. Although it's really it must be really hard to tell a 19-year-old boy that, you know, you've got to go and do a plumbing course when he just
Yeah,
just wants to play rugby, basically.
exactly.
Yeah, and I think
100%.
you touched upon it there. It's structuring that week, you know, and sometimes the week changes. You're playing on a Friday or a Saturday or a Sunday. The run up to that looks differently, but you know that as the season schedule comes out, and you can plan accordingly.
Yeah.
So there is time. Do a course, go and do some work experience or whatever, and it gives you I think, you know, and this needs to be explained, I think, better, and I only really caught it at the tail end of my career. It makes you a much more rounded player because you're a more rounded person. You know, you are learning, you're coming away from for the rugby, it's freshening you up for when you go back into it, you know, and you're developing as a person. That's never a bad thing. And, you know, potentially, you know, if you're productive, reducing that stress as you come up to nearing that transition point.
And I think post rugby, I think that, you know, not only does it help in the sense of what if they get that experience, but I also believe then that whole cycle for me, and I think we can do a lot more. And I mean, I speak for myself as well, because you're so caught up in your family and your own life and your business and whatever. I think as rugby players who have had the opportunity to be at the top end, and even guys that have, you know, I'm talking about provincial, international, I just think there's a lot more we can do for each other. Like, I think there are players that do incredible stuff, and I suppose, but if you look at the whole, we have so much, I suppose, in common to the kind of person that's walked on the street, you know, and I suppose we have experienced things similarly on the field and within the environment of training and the environment of the stresses of the injuries that can end your career, and now you suddenly have no contract, and you suddenly now looking at no salary, and suddenly you haven't prepared for this, and all these stresses that, you know, we've most of us experienced that, you know, and I think we can definitely, I suppose, in one way, you know, come together in one, and there's great platforms now already. LinkedIn has been great for that. I think LinkedIn is one of those platforms that have done that, you know, and it's brought. I've had incredible support there. I think I'm, you know, grateful for all the support I've had on there. It's huge. I mean, it's a great platform, and you know that we can kind of find our way there, and I suppose understand great things that happen in the corporate world, and bring some of our skills within there, and us learn from the corporate world, and, you know, push on around and find some solutions. But I suppose as rugby players, we are rugby players, and I suppose we have in one part a lot of similar things that we can kind of support each other with.
For sure.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, back in the old days when I played, you know, if you're at London Irish and you needed a job, you just walk into the clubhouse and you get sorted out with a job. And sometimes I think the separation from players and fans has made that, you know, has made that a bit harder over the years. But one very important point you made about LinkedIn, and what I would say to any player, it's all about, you know, building your own personal brand on LinkedIn to talk about perhaps your experiences in rugby and how that can relate to business. I've seen that happen with players, and building that brand will prepare you, I think, as well, for life after rugby.
Definitely.
But going on to some of the dark arts and teaching our business folk here about scrimmaging, what would you say what's the one leadership principle from the scrum that every business leader should understand?
Well, that's a simple one for me. It's just, I suppose, in a rugby sense, in a scrum sense, being a cohesive unit.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's really important. I think as we found now with the scrum, even most recently, you know, one part falls and generally the dominoes come down. That's the effect on the other guys and other players, you know. And I find that's probably falls into teamwork and all the other aspects around that. But being a cohesive unit is probably, I think, a better word, because you have some sort of direction. You've got goals. You're ambitious. You know, you're kind of moving forward. And I suppose you're trying to break through, even though there's pressure. You know, fighting through pressure zones, and, you know, as we do in the scrum. You know, so I think that's probably a good way to kind of put it.
Yeah, cohesive unit. And would you say as well? I mean, that's a great answer. Don't go backwards. What would you say?
I sometimes think at the scrum, and I suppose we did this more recently now that the scrum has changed. Don't go backwards, but I suppose rather for me is kind of if you do you have the ability to go forwards again? Because sometimes when I coach the scrum, I kind of say, well, connections are really important in the sense of the shoulders and the hips and the feet. Sometimes a team that you'll find that has got the upper hand and they get momentum. A lot of the time, when you do get momentum, and Fitzy will, and you guys will know this, Liam, moving forward in the scrum, you have multiple foot movement. Then there's movement in the hips and there's movement in the shoulders. So if you can keep together and keep a unit really intact, you have an opportunity to react and come back at that. And your chances of reacting very well is good, because why? They are looser than they ever have been from the start of that scrum, So it doesn't happen very often, but I would believe, I've had it. You find you through, and then suddenly you hit a brick wall. What's going on now? And then you actually completely separated from your hooker, and it can be kind of a real nasty surprise. So I would say, to say if you don't go back, but I suppose if you do go, put the things in place to go forward again. I think it will kind of take them by surprise again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and I think it ties into what you were saying earlier, having that vision, making a plan, and doing the work together, right? So everyone's coordinated, everyone buys into that, whether it be the scrum, life, business, units, that all helps. So
yeah, and I think, sorry, Fitzy, I was going to say then, I think the important part around, say, in the kind of leadership or corporate or whatever, in the sense of like the fundamentals are so important. And I suppose the fundamentals, when you talk about scrum and stuff, and the kind of key areas of the scrum are so important. I mean, those key areas for me, as maybe in kind of leadership or corporate, in business, should be obviously implemented. But I suppose within that, once that is kind of implemented and the standard is set, what then has to come is really the buy-in mentally, the kind of that emotional stuff. And I mean, what drives that initially, that is going to be the essence and the difference. So a lot of the people can just, as I said in a scrum, you can bind, you can tell someone how to bind, but at what point does the pressure come too much and you lose your bind? Or what pressure does the pressure come too much and you move your foot? And these things that obviously lead in leadership, I suppose, have the knock-on effects that are quite big. And I mean, how much are you then relying on your second row or your back row to hold you in or secure you, or knowing what you're going through, understanding how we're on the same page there? So look, I just thought I'd send that in there, but that's similarly to kind of almost forgetting. We want to forget about the fundamentals. Those need to be givens. That's the standard. That is our standard inevitably, because when we get to the 60th or 65th minute, we don't want to be thinking about specifics then. We've just come from a maul. We are 10 tackles down, blowing like a tractor, and we want to now 5 points down. We got one scrum to turn this around. What do we do at that moment? We want to really buy them emotionally.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree more. And you've been in some great environments, obviously winning a World Cup, playing around the world. So you've seen great team cultures there. If you were to, and you have set up a business, but if you were to start again tomorrow in a team or in a business, what would be one non-negotiable for culture for you?
For me, I reckon the big thing will be trust. I think trust is something that goes far and beyond. I think trust is something that is basically goes through from the coaches to the players that you play with, and especially the professional realm, that you're playing with different players from different cultures, I suppose from a coaching perspective, you want to trust the coach that he's giving you the clear, kind of honest answers around your game, and also has a good outlook on where you see you. And then I think the biggest part as well, part and parcel of a combat of a combat sport, if you want to call it that, a physical sport, and as we have rugby, is trust in your conditioning and your medical staff. I can't tell you how fortunate I have been to have really top strength and conditioning and medical staff along the way. You know, I find that that's been probably the difference of kind of that edge where you kind of, I suppose, when Liam was asking me earlier about the confidence thing, is that's when you probably feel it most when you're coming back from an injury. You know, not so much when you're at the top and can see the whole world, but it's when you're coming up from the bottom again, starting from the bottom again. I think that's where you kind of really are tested. So the trust around, you trust them. You basically know that you're putting your whole career in their hands. The rehab, the process of the surgeon, you know, all those sort of aspects around trust. And I think that then falls in line with honesty. You know, that allows for real clarity, you know, around the group.
And sorry, Fitzy, you were going to ask?
No, go walk away. Go walk away.
You know, obviously you played all over the world. You played for the Springboks. You played for some great teams. Obviously played under some great coaches. What coaches have impressed you the most as leaders, and why?
Like specific coaches, in the sense of the team. So
Yeah.
I suppose I was a player that enjoyed being told what to do and told quite sternly. I wanted to be told. I suppose growing up in my early playing days, I played with some legends in the game, and I suppose as the old school was, if I didn't get off the ground fast enough, or if I didn't maybe make a hard enough tackle, I was told. So I suppose ingrained in that, I enjoyed coaches telling me exactly where I stood, but also telling me, you know, sternly and really being on my back about it, because I found that pushed me on. I suppose most are coaches that, in one sense, I suppose in one sense probably wanted to find the middle ground. I enjoyed just as much, but I suppose what I preferred was really being told what I needed to do, and then I would find a way to do it, or what I was lacking. Coaching wise, I think it's along the years. I suppose early in my days, in my under 20 days, I had a coach, in Swanepoel, that was coaching me at Legions. He was like a mentor to me. He was kind of young coach, but he was really successful, and you know, he probably saw me early on, gave me the opportunity early on, and I suppose I found that, I suppose in one sense, you kind of as a player then don't want to let those coaches down. You almost buy in. You kind of really put yourself in a position that you don't want to leave those coaches down that really have this kind of belief in you, know. So for me, early days, that really stood in part. Obviously, Jake White was one of my coaches that selected me for the Springboks, so gave me my opportunity, and he was a great, I suppose, team coach. He understood how to build a team. He understood how to build a coaching staff. He was smart enough to bring some skilled coaches along the way, and build a real team culture there with great players, but also a visual that where we wanted to go. So again, looking at that aspect of a coach that was how you build a team around real strong individuals and find that you could get results, because that was not always the case, And then coming abroad, I suppose it was also the environment I found myself, At times I found myself in environments, I think Fitzy will know, at Ulster we came in at the beginning, we were rebuilding, we were rebuilding something at Ulster, so there was obviously our own pressure on ourselves with the pressure on the coaches, and you kind of sometimes felt that as players, and again it's a time thing, it takes time, and then leading over to Munster, they were again on the other end, having some results early on, Heineken Cup 2006, 2008, and trying to find their, I suppose, way again after that, and coaches coming in from me. I enjoyed, we had obviously Tony McGann, Rob Penny, Axel Foley was a real close coach. He was really close to me as a coach. He kind of loved the forward stuff, as Fitzy will know. It was just really a hard man. And loved the maul, loved the scrum. Really a real hands-on, as we know. As he was a player, he was a coach. And I suppose he's probably one of the coaches that does stand out to me as one of those guys that put your body on the line as a player, you'll do the same as a coach. You know, it resonated with the players. And I suppose going over to France, it wasn't all jouet, but it was a different experience. I was coached by Pierre Mignoni at Lyon, and then Gonzalo Quesada at Biarritz, and Simon Rawali as well. So my tenure was short there, but again, an environment that I really enjoyed. And both those coaches were really great coaches to me, you know. And again, I suppose at the end of my career, they understood what was important to me. I was obviously still very much wanted to play the best rugby I could, but you know, family and all this other parts of the puzzle was also part of it, you know.
So you obviously you like leaders that were directive towards you. Can I ask? Did you play under any like coaches or leaders where you disagreed with what they were doing and how you would react if they told you to do something? Fire back.
I would say that there were definitely, you know, I think being a front row forward is quite simple at times, you know. You basically put your head down and you don't ask questions and you go. And I suppose learning that early on in my career, go hard and just go, you know, and kind of, or if someone does go, you just follow them. And I suppose in one sense, like, you know, you kind of learn that to be part of your mantra. You know, you kind of say, well, listen, there's always a way better here to try and find a way. And I suppose coach's directive is hopefully just to guide you and to build a framework to kind of give you those entries, you know, especially at the top end. You know, they don't want to, coaches that come in and trying to, thankfully I've never had that, but I think sometimes the question will be asked is they want to change the whole framework. And I suppose that's when you ask the question around, I would think, right, as a player, put myself in that position, working. But I suppose as a player, sometimes off the battle is to fully buy into something. I think that's half the battle. So when a coach comes and presents something to you, half the battle for me to make it work is to fully buy into it. You know? And I suppose as a player, you learn very early that fully buy into it if it works, rather than ask the questions and half-ass it. You know, I believe you kind of go for it. And as a rugby player, you know, sometimes a bad decision make it good on the field. And I suppose that's kind of resonates with a lot of the other parts. But no, I haven't really completely, you know, however, in my mind, I have said, oh, well, who's this coach, kind of scrum coach, and what is he going to kind of teach? You know, as you are as a professional, but soon you realize very quickly, and I'm on the other side now as well. You know, they're not there to change; they're there to support. They're there to guide. They're there to kind of have a conversation, you know, and I suppose bring that wealth of experience they have.
Great.
Oh, very good. We're almost at the end. We're through to our quick 5 questions. Before we do that, if you've been enjoying the conversation as much as Moo and I have and watching this, please hit like, follow and subscribe wherever you're listening. And now we'll get into those top 5 questions. Don't overthink them, BJ. No pressure. What's one habit or ritual that keeps you grounded?
I would say preparation. You know, I would say preparing. You know, I think that's probably, if I look at the other side that hasn't kept me grounded, is when I failed to prepare. You know, I find that's probably the one area that is part of it, and it's become a habit in one sense through my rugby years, but also now, specifically now as a coach, be prepared. You know, and I suppose that also leads on to the adaptation, because sometimes you can prepare and it doesn't work out, and it's how you adapt in afterwards. But there's probably one thing: preparation. You know? Be prepared and you know, making sure you're as best prepared as possible.
Very good. The best prop you've ever played with or against, and why? And it's not a loaded question, although there is one correct answer.
Standing very hard.
What I was going to say, other than you, Fitz, we've had our fair share of tussles, and I loved them back in the day. But I suppose, you know, I've been asked this question a lot, and I think as you find when you go through your career, you basically, you know, you have these memories of facing, you know, Case Muse or or some of the Carl Hoof down in the House of Pain, and with Anton Oliver at hooker, and you're hitting brick walls all day long. But look at that as a 21 and 22-year-old. You're still learning the trade. But I suppose my biggest battles, I reckon, has been with my kind of fellow South Africans, and I find that probably a guy like Osterrand sticks out. He's one of those kind of ahead of his game in '95. Massive respect for him to come back after retiring, make it out in 2007 again, and him having this whole effect on you as a teammate, but also the battles that I had with himself and Narko Drotsky, and fellow South African, obviously players that I respected over the years, is probably stands out, and we've had our fair tussles, and look, I think Osterrand for me is probably the one to go with there.
Fair enough. One book, movie, or podcast that shaped how you think about leadership?
That's an interesting one. I suppose the book I mentioned earlier was I suppose Outliers, and that's by Malcolm Gladwell. And I suppose I kind of no, it wasn't Outliers. What's his book called? Is it Outliers? I'm trying to think now.
That's what you mentioned earlier, I believe.
Yeah, I don't know what he's. Could be called something else. But anyway, it is about the general outlier, and I suppose it kind of talks about the ice hockey in Canada, where they select by age, by month, by quarter. So each is selected by quarter, and how they evolve over from a young age group and over the years, and the coaches they get, and over those, the best coaches are basically the January, February, March, lot, and then it moves on to the end part where the smaller players in structure and physicality are the kind of October, November, December. But your most valuable at the end part, and the guys that really are the ones that you want to take forward, are the guys that actually make it from the October, November, December cohort, at the top, because those are the guys that have found a way. Again, they found a way somehow through maybe the less coaching, and they've got that inside of them, and I suppose, there's, I don't know if there's some leadership in that, but, I would say that that's one of the, the books that I enjoyed, and showed a lot of what I look for now. And I say not look for, but I value a lot in players that come through now and have that drive and have that inner self-belief over and above the skills and the talent they might have, because I feel that if you have that built innate belief and a real burning desire within you, you can build a house on that, build a castle on that. The other way around is a lot tougher.
Interesting. What's one thing rugby taught you that still serves you today?
So much. There's so much that taught me, I suppose. Other than just that, you kind of, how can they say, that saying about one day you're the cock of the walk, the next day you're a feather duster, is very is very true. And I suppose it kind of, there's so much to this, that it's just kind of, it's really, as I suppose, one refined me in one way, that all the kind of fun, can I say what the kind of attributes it has, from teamwork to I suppose being down in the dumps when you're injured, and coming out the top in euphoria, and all those emotional ups and downs, it's kind of that life carries on. It's kind of a part of you, and that life carries on. And I suppose it's taught me that, obviously all the resilience, and, kind of face other parts of life. But I suppose the big thing comes down to is that, the importance of that whole reason why you start. And it's first and foremost enjoyment. I think the enjoyment and the passion you have for something is everything that way. And I think that everything comes after that. Even just, if I realized when I was playing for the Sharks, you don't even think about, this is a career, this is my dream. I always wanted to play for the Sharks, and that was it. It's like whatever comes after that comes, and I think that's the one thing that when you go into something, it needs to be enjoyable, and if you can, it needs to be passionate, something that you're passionate about. And I suppose that's for me is worth, if you want to call it, the pain and the downs. Really, the ups will come, and I suppose that's part of it.
Finish this sentence. Leadership is.
I always like to say, I don't know how a person has said it, but leadership is action practice. Almost like I find that I'm always a big believer of action rather than talk, and I find that the best for me is led by the action, and that was the crux for me about following. Everyone can talk. It's just when you kind of walk that and you kind of show that you're cauldron. So if you want to put it in action practice, I don't know if that makes sense, but that's probably it in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, BJ, from anchoring scrums on the world stage to shaping the future from the grassroots up, your journey is a masterclass in humility, resilience, and quiet leadership. You've shown us the real strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the presence in the pressure, the discipline in the dark places, and the willingness to start again when no one's watching. Thank you for bringing your story, your insight, your heart to the business end. You've reminded us and everyone listening that leadership doesn't end when the final whistle blows, it just changes form. We're grateful for your time, your wisdom, and the legacy you're still building. Thank you very much for joining us, BJ.
Thank you, BJ.
Cheers, Jim. Thanks.
Bye.